Yeah, you know what? Let's go ahead and begin. Give me a moment to share my screen to get my deck up. Spent all yesterday making this deck, so I hope you enjoy it. I'm not a web designer, but I think we have a pretty good design here for our SoarPay deck. So, everyone, let's begin. Welcome in to today's webinar. Today's webinar is titled Why Your Business Was Labeled High Risk and What to Do About It. So, if you're watching this webinar, you may be wondering, why was my business labeled high risk? And you could fall into a few different buckets. Maybe you have been labeled as high risk, but you're already with a merchant services provider who specializes in high risk and you just want to learn more about this. Or maybe you're a new startup, you're applying for a merchant account for your startup and you understand, hey, I'm in a highly regulated industry, maybe nutraceuticals or something like that. So you're actively seeking out a specialized service provider such as SoarPay. Or hopefully you're not one of those unfortunate merchants who have their account shut down suddenly by one of the mainstream payments providers like Stripe or Square, but we're going to circle back to that a little bit later. So today in today's webinar, we're going to discuss what that label means, high risk. We'll explore how banks and processors make their decisions and what that means for you. Most importantly, I'm going to show you how to protect your business from unnecessary account shutdowns. And this is a topic that affects thousands, tens of thousands of merchants every year. But with the right knowledge, it's completely manageable. So let's talk about a little bit more specifically. These are some of the specific topics that we're going to cover by the end. What the term high risk really means, because it can mean several different things depending on what type of industry that you're in. We're going to talk through the common reasons why merchants are labeled as high risk, and some of them are a little bit surprising. I will explain how underwriters truly evaluate financial and reputational risks. This isn't always obvious from the outside looking in. And we're also going to expose the instant approval trap. So, this is a big issue with platforms like Stripe or Square or PayPal and some of these very well known payment processing platforms. And finally, I'm going to share some practical, easy steps to help stabilize your payment processing long term so that you don't have to worry about payments and you can just concentrate on growing your business. But first, just a little bit about our company, SoarPay, who's hosting this webinar. We are the leader in merchant accounts for high risk and regulated industries. And we'll talk a little bit more about what those industries are. We have been serving this high risk market segment for over a decade. So we've come by all of our knowledge and expertise the hard way. Our team is based in Dallas, Texas, and I think this is really important. When you call in to your merchant services company, you want to talk with a human being, and if you're in the United States, you want to talk with a support specialist who's also based in the United States. And a little note about how we are the market leader. I want to give a shout out to our team who does the podcast, High Risk Merchant Accounts 101. This is the leading podcast in the space with a lot more information related to the things that we're talking about in today's webinar. And our show is now available on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. So make sure you check that out. Just go to YouTube, type in High Risk Merchant Accounts 101 or your favorite podcast listening platform, and you'll see our podcast. A quick note about our executive team, right? Because with a payments company, when you talk about one of the big guys like your Square or your Stripe or your PayPal, like good luck if you call in. Good luck talking to a human being at one of these giant mega corporations if you ever have a problem. By contrast, in the payments industry, a lot of the smaller or mid-sized companies, it's really all about who are the people that I'm working with, who are the people that when I call in, that when I have an issue, who is going to be helping me. And so at SoarPay, I truly believe that we have the best team that serves this market, and we're led by our CEO, Adam Carlson. He's been working in this market segment for over a decade. And I also want to give a big shout out to Bill Glass, our Chief Revenue Officer. He has forgotten more about payments probably than I will ever learn. He has tons of relationships throughout the industry with different processors and banks. So truly, his knowledge is encyclopedic. So if you have any technical questions that I can't answer on today's webinar and you want to shoot me an email, I can always work with Bill or other members of our team to get you an answer to your question. Rich McIver is our VP of Business Development. We have lots of partnerships throughout the industry, and he heads up our partnerships. And then myself, I am VP of Marketing. So I get to host today's webinar. By the way, I love doing these webinars. If you have a question, I love getting interaction and comments during the live stream. So be sure to ask your question in the chat. Either I'll get to it as I go through the presentation, or I'm also going to leave a little bit of time towards the end to answer questions at the end of the presentation. I see we already have a few questions coming in on the chat. So keep them coming, guys. I want to start though. So, what is the real cost of being labeled high risk? So, many business owners don't even realize that their business is high risk until something unfortunately goes wrong, right? So, think like if you have an account with Stripe or Square or one of these, big processors, you can get a sudden account freeze or termination, and this can happen with zero notice. And when it does, your funds can be locked up for up to 6 months. So imagine your entire revenue stream gets paused for 180 days. Your payroll stops, your marketing spend stops, your customers can't check out on your e-commerce platform, on your website. So this is like a nightmare scenario for a business. And this is exactly why it's so important to understand as a merchant what is your risk profile before you choose your payment partner. Knowledge equals protection. So move to the next slide. What high risk actually means. And honestly, I think this is where there are so many myths and misconceptions that I want to debunk right now on this webinar. So, first of all, high risk doesn't mean that you've done anything wrong, right? This isn't an ethical label, it's not a moral judgment. The label within the context of the payments industry is simply a reflection of perceived financial exposure from the processor's point of view. So a payment processor, they're looking at things like chargeback frequency and refund rates, the potential for fraud. How about a business's industry, right? The regulations and oversight of certain highly regulated industries. There's also reputational sensitivity or media risk. There's certain industries that, certain banks may want to avoid working with. So in other words, the label of high risk, this is really a technical term. It is not at all a character statement or a moral judgment about your business. But let's talk a little bit. Why are banks and payment processors so cautious, right? So why is high risk even, a bad thing from their point of view? And by the way, it depends on the bank and processors. Some banks love working with high risk merchants, especially in certain industries. But why mainstream banks and payment processors, they worry because when chargebacks happen and a merchant can't cover the cost of those chargebacks, the liability rolls upstream to the payment services provider and their acquiring bank, right? So getting merchant services in a way is like getting an unsecured line of credit where the ultimate liability flows upstream to the bank or processor. So if your business fails or if it goes offline, a payment processor can have liability for any chargebacks or refunds that happen at that time or subsequently. So when a processor does their underwriting, they build models that predict potential loss, and then if the numbers in their model look risky, your business can be labeled as high risk. They may also just have certain industries that they automatically flag. And regardless of your business's processing history, if you're in a specific industry, you're just labeled as high risk. So, this label is especially common in industries that have delayed delivery. So, for instance, the travel industry or big ticket items, if you're selling furniture through an e-commerce website, something like that, or maybe you're in an industry with that's highly regulated, like nutraceuticals. So there's lots of different ways that a merchant can get labeled as high risk. Um, let's talk about a few other triggers though, and some of these are operational, right? They're not just I'm in an industry that's labeled as high risk. Um, but you might be in the industry. So let's talk about some of the big high risk industries: firearms, supplements, credit repair, travel, gaming, any kind of big ticket e-commerce. But also beyond industry, you could be labeled high risk because of your billing model, right? You might offer some sort of subscription or membership on recurring billing. Sometimes e-commerce websites will use negative option billing, right? Where a customer needs to opt out to avoid being rebilled. Typically, that's going to be associated with a higher chargeback or refund rate. Another reason you could be labeled as high risk is long fulfillment times or refund heavy sales. So, thinking about that long fulfillment time, like maybe you operate a travel business where you're selling tours or airline tickets, and your typical customer is buying those 3 months ahead of time. That is considered a risk from a payment processor's point of view. Um, it might also have to do with when you apply for a merchant account, just your business structure or your application. Like you might have inconsistent paperwork, or maybe your ownership structure is unclear with your application. So there's a lot of different ways that a business can be labeled high risk. Even though it's one label, it can mean or imply a lot of different things. And here's one thing I really want to stress: that your business can be 100% legitimate, 100% clean and ethical, but just some sort of structural factor alone can land your business in this high risk category with this label. Now, I want to take a brief moment to talk about the instant approval trap, because this is something that we see again and again with a lot of, unfortunately, with a lot of our clients at SoarPay. And again, I hope that people do their research up front, right? So before they even begin to do their payment processing, they understand that they're going to be labeled as high risk by certain payment providers. And so they can partner with a provider like SoarPay and avoid that headache from ever happening. But these PayFacs, so these payment facilitators, your Stripes, your Squares, these big corporations, what their appeal is it's very easy for a new startup or a new merchant to get up and running with payment processing. So you can go to Square or Stripe, you can sign up for an account. They might mail you some sort of card swiper or USB dongle where you can start swiping cards, and it's like as easy as one, two, three. But here's the deal: you are receiving instant approval for your account with them. But that's not real underwriting. Your account, it wasn't underwritten by a human being. It's just basically giving you temporary access to the ability to process payments. So they're using an aggregator model at these PayFacs, your Stripe, your Square, your PayPal. You're processing under like a larger account. But once your activity triggers something, so this could be a week later, a month later, 3 months later, based on your sales volume or your transaction count, at some point, your account might get reviewed either by some sort of automated script or by a human being. And then all of a sudden, something in your account triggers this red flag, this label that your account is high risk. So an algorithm kicks in. Oftentimes, it's just automated algorithm, and your account can be frozen or it can be terminated immediately without notice. So this happens every day to businesses at Stripe, at Square, at these sorts of PayFacs. And frankly, it's devastating for the merchants who rely on this steady cash flow. So even if you get another merchant account up and running in a few days, I mean, even losing 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days of cash flow can be devastating for small or mid-sized business. So the takeaway is the convenience of a PayFac today can cost you tomorrow. So that's contrasted with a dedicated high risk service provider. So that's like a SoarPay that specializes in high risk payment services. So at SoarPay, at these high risk merchant services specialists, we're going to underwrite you as a merchant before you're approved for processing not afterward, right? So that may seem like a little bit of a pain. Like I have to wait. It may take 2 or 3 or up to 5 days before I'm approved for a merchant account. But on the other hand, because my payment partner understands all of these things about my business, right? Because I'm applying for my account and I might be uploading some additional documents and I'm letting the partner know about my industry and my transaction volume because they have access to all of this information. There's no surprises later, right? So it's as long as you're transparent when you apply for that merchant account, then on the provider's end, like with SoarPay, it's our job to give you stable processing, and we're going into it with eyes wide open, so to speak. So to me, if your business is going to be labeled as high risk, it's a much less stressful and better business decision to work with a provider who specializes in it rather than saying, oh, it's a little bit easier and faster to go with Stripe or Square. I'm just going to put my processing with them until one day my account suddenly gets shut down. So let's talk a little bit how underwriters evaluate risk, right? Because I mentioned at SoarPay or at a high risk merchant services provider, we're going to underwrite your application before you are approved for a merchant account. And we're really looking at two main categories when we're talking about risk. First of all, industry risk. So we're evaluating this, can be based on your MCC code, just your industry code when you apply. And we're looking at the industry's historical risk factors, right? That so some industries just have a higher chargeback rate. So we talked about industries that might have subscription billing or negative billing, like nutraceuticals, where you can get a free trial of a product, and then there's recurring billing or a negative billing option. Or, for instance, the travel industry, where there's this long lead time between when you place an order for an airline ticket or some kind of a tour and the fulfillment of the product. Those industries just tend to have higher chargebacks. So sometimes you're just going to be labeled high risk based on the industry. Other times it's because of operational risk, right? So this might be something more specific to your business. So, for instance, maybe not everyone in your industry has a higher chargeback rate, but your specific business has had a spike in chargebacks because of something you were doing operationally recently. So you can also be labeled as high risk because of some sort of operational issue. Now, bad news and good news. The bad news is you can't change your industry. The good news is operational risk, in my opinion, is almost 100% controllable. You can control your business operations, and we're going to talk about how to do that. So, here are some steps you can do to decrease your risk profile. And by the way, these sorts of steps, they may take a business that's been labeled as high risk and help you recategorize your business as lower risk or maybe mid risk. Um, but you still might say, if my business has been flagged as high risk, I might want to work with a provider like SoarPay who specializes in my industry. But that being said, by taking all of these steps to reduce my risk profile, typically I can get much better pricing, right? So, in many instances, you can be working with a specialist like SoarPay and get as good as or better pricing with a company like SoarPay than you would at a traditional merchant services company. But you need to be a good operator. So, you want to keep your chargebacks low, right? Definitely below 1% of your total transactions. You should maintain clear, easy to find refund and cancellation policies. These should be easy to find on your website. And if you have any kind of subscription billing, you need to inform people how to cancel. Make sure to use billing descriptors that match your brand name, right? So if a consumer's checking their credit card statement, they know exactly what each charge is for, who your company is. If you have any customer service issues, like with a shipping delay or a policy change, make sure to communicate with your customers. And of course, in terms of working with your payment provider, you want to respond quickly to their underwriting requests. And my advice always is be as transparent as possible. The more information that you give us, the more we can help you to access that stable processing. So, underwriters, they don't expect perfection, but they do need consistency and they need transparency, right? We can only help you in as much as you're sharing information with us. So I have a handy little checklist. I call it Andy's checklist. These are the small things that I do think make a big difference, a big impression with underwriters. And think of this as like your table stakes for credibility. So I'm applying for a high risk merchant account. Maybe I've had a spike in chargebacks or some sort of issues with my previous processor. Well, the first thing the underwriter is going to do, they're going to look at your website. Do you have a privacy policy? Do you have a terms and conditions page that lists your refund and cancellation policies? How about a contact us page? Do you have a support email and a working phone number? This is a big one, is the phone number, right? A lot of websites will list a phone number. You call the phone number, and it will go straight to like a business voicemail, right? And there's no human answering the phone. All of these little things will add up to bolster trust and bolster credibility. And again, they're all under your control. I'm also a sucker for a good about us page, list the real human beings behind your company, just like we did at the beginning of this webinar, right? I want to show the team behind SoarPay because that builds trust and that builds credibility. So we've talked about high risk and how it can be a disadvantage. But I want to talk about how high risk actually can be an advantage, right? Because if you think about a lot of these industries that have been labeled as high risk are actually in fast growing, high profit margin market segments, right? It may be a segment where regulation or consumer perception, policy perception lags behind innovation. So high risk doesn't mean bad business. Sometimes it just means newer industry. The key is to manage your risk intelligently, right? You want to have transparent documentation when you're applying for merchant services. You want to have strong communication with the team who's going to be offering you services, and you want to pick the right processing partner, right? So this is where I recommend SoarPay to anyone who's operating in a highly regulated industry, or if they've been labeled as high risk. Give us a chance, because as a partner, we can actually give your business an edge, right? If you have stable processing that is allowing you to grow, and a lot of the other competitors in your industry do not have access to stable processing, and sooner or later they might fall into that instant approval trap. This is actually an asset that can help you unlock growth for your business. So I want to thank you. We still have a few minutes left in the webinar, but I'm about to get to Q&A here shortly. But I want to thank you for joining the webinar today. I had a lot of fun doing this. I got to answer just a lot of the most common questions that we get, and really just trying to bust some of those common myths and misconceptions. Just remember, high risk, it doesn't mean unbankable, right? You just want to partner with a trusted provider who understands your business and your industry. So I have time. We still have time for a few questions. Let me we got 5 or 6 questions in the live stream here. Um, so first question, this all makes sense except you use the word payfac. What is a payfac? So a payfac is a payment facilitator, right? So think of your Square, your Stripe, your PayPal, and these are companies that they create these. They're called technically master accounts, and rather than really issuing you necessarily your own individual merchant account, they're allowing many different businesses to all process in these master accounts. And that's how they can basically approve new businesses instantly without doing any underwriting. Of course, if you do enough transactions, if you do enough dollar volume, sooner or later, either an algorithm or a human being will underwrite your account. They'll do it after the fact, though, and it can be very inconvenient. Let me see a couple more questions here. Oh, a comment. I love your podcast. That's High Risk Merchant Accounts 101, the podcast. That's how I found out about your webinar today. Well, thank you for listening. We appreciate all of our podcast listeners. Um, let's see. Is there a way to download Andy's checklist? The replay of this webinar will live on our YouTube channel. So you can just navigate to, that part of the webinar replay and take a little screenshot. But also, if you want to email us, just sales@soarpay.com and ask for the checklist. I'm happy to pass along a copy of the entire deck, the PowerPoint deck that we used today. So you can access it that way. Again, just shoot us an email at sales@soarpay.com. I think we have time for one more question. So from Recording Excellence, I run a very successful music business helping audio engineers. We do about $100,000 a month selling digital products and memberships. Am I a high risk because we aren't delivering physical products? Well, that's a good question. So, um, I wouldn't necessarily say that any kind of info product, website or e-commerce company is ipso facto high risk. But I do think, you have a couple factors there that lead me to believe you may be labeled as high risk. So recurring billing is one, info products without physical delivery, you know, that's another. It really would kind of depend on your volume and then your chargeback and refund rate. So typically, if you have tens of thousands of monthly paying users or customers doing smaller transactions, and a very, very low chargeback or refund rate, I would say, you're probably not. I wouldn't at least personally label you as high risk, although different providers may have different opinions on that. But conversely, if you have that higher price point with a subscription product, where even one or two or three chargebacks can actually represent a pretty significant spike in terms of dollar volume and chargeback, then I think, I personally would say you're very least borderline with that high risk label. So that's a good question. I would invite you get in touch with our team at SoarPay. Let our experienced, friendly sales associates help you out because they have seen, I promise you, they've seen every industry, every type of startup under the sun. So, if you call in, if you talk with our team and you ask them, hey, this is what's going on in my business. These are the challenges we face. This is our operating history. This is the industry that we're in. They're going to be able to give you an answer as to how your business is going to be typically categorized by both a traditional merchant services provider like a Square or Stripe or some of these other big mega corporations, and they can also give you their take on if you partner with SoarPay, what kind of pricing you can expect, or how that might look a little different than partnering with a mainstream merchant services provider. So again, soarpay.com, get in touch with our team. Let us help you. Let us partner with you to help you navigate this process and get your business processing in a stable and secure way that allows your business to grow. Thank you again for attending today's webinar. I know I had a few other questions. If you have additional questions, you can always email our team. And I look forward to doing another one of these webinars in the coming weeks. So make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you will be automatically notified of our upcoming webinars. Thanks and have a great day.